question. Is it the government's responsibility to protect us from a virus? Is it the government's responsibility to protect us from a virus? Many want to say yes, believing it's their responsibility to protect life, but that's not the government's responsibility. Especially given the fact that doing so actually infringes on undeniable God-given rights, like the right to work, the right to worship, again, the right to be with your family when they're dying, in some cases, the right to life. I would love to be wrong on this, but with good, credible information, if an individual in the hospital right now undergoes a cardiac arrest, a nurse must put on full PPE prior to administering CPR. So someone is having a heart attack, and they got to put on full PPE before they administer CPR to that person. In some cases, the right to life. And you might think, but what about war? I mean, isn't the government to protect life in the context of war? And if it is, doesn't that make the protection of life fundamental to its responsibility? But even then, the government's responsibility in the context of war is to protect rights, of which life is one. War ought to take place to protect inalienable rights. See World War II, for example. And so to this question, is the government's responsibility to protect us from a virus? No, we live in a fallen world. Viruses are inevitable in a fallen world, and it isn't the government's responsibility to protect us from a virus. What's their responsibility? To protect our God-given rights. In fact, when you listen to our government, as they talk about these lockdown measures, they talk about trying to balance the infringement on our civil liberties with the harms stemming from the lockdowns. That's pretty significant. Our government acknowledges publicly that there are harms that are a result of the lockdown measures. Let's let that sink in for a little bit. Now, if they are trying to balance our civil liberties against the harms stemming from lockdown measures, they are out of their God-ordained lane. They are stepping into a lane that is not theirs. In effect, they are seeking to play the role of God. Why? Because implicitly, they're deciding who gets to suffer. And what's its justification for doing so? That our health system could become stressed, might become overwhelmed. Can't say will, because it hasn't happened yet. And there's no guarantee that it will. Could become overwhelmed, might become stressed. And again, what's amazing is that our government actually acknowledges the harms of lockdown measures. They recognize there are harms resulting from their actions. And I want you to feel the weight of this. Is the virus the government's fault? No, to our knowledge, our government has no responsibility, no culpability with regard to the presence of the virus. And so if someone should die from COVID-19, is the government culpable? No. We live in a fallen world. Viruses and death are inevitable. A virus is unleashed on the world. God is sovereign over that virus. The effects of that virus are not the government's responsibility. They do not have the responsibility to protect us from the virus. There's no culpability when someone dies from COVID-19. But what if someone dies as a result of government lockdown measures. Is there culpability then before God? I would say there is. Why? Because they're out of their God-ordained role. They're no longer functioning in accordance with their God-intended purpose. And therefore, the harms that result from their actions actually fall to them as their responsibility, where they're going to have to give an account for those harms to God. That's significant. We're just talking about Alberta right now. Broaden it to the whole world, where most of the governments of this world are in lockstep in the way they're handling this so-called pandemic. And so what should the government have done at the beginning? Should have equipped Albertans with the best information they have and protect their inalienable rights to work, to worship, to be with family, to live. The risk of the virus falls to who? The individual. The individual gets to assume their level of risk with regard to the virus, not the government. It's not their role. It's not their function. It's not why God put them there. You say, well, what if the healthcare system ended up actually being overwhelmed? Well, look, that's incredibly difficult. That is no doubt a crisis. That is something surely to look at soberly and consider soberly. But God is sovereign. And government needs to stay in its God-ordained lane. And they're not going to like this answer. But you trust the Lord, and you do everything you possibly can to meet the need when it arises. You take other steps to account for that possibility while still protecting the God-given rights of mankind. And that might even require leaning on the general public to get involved in the healthcare system, to serve their neighbors in the event that things got stressed. Look, I'm willing to get in there. If our hospitals are gonna go and burst the seams, I'll get involved. I'll serve our neighbors. I'll put myself in the line of fire on that. Wouldn't you? That is a much more humane, honorable, glorious solution for mankind to really come together, should we get to that point. Instead of this false sentimentality where we're all in this together now. Now let's say you're the premier. And taking that approach is political suicide. What do? I mean, you survey it. If you are aware of your God-ordained role and function, and you go, if I do that, I'm going to commit political suicide. What do? You die a political death. You have a responsibility before God and to the people of Alberta who have elected you to put your foot down and stand and protect their God-given rights. Amen. That's what you need to do.